One of the biggest genres in gaming to reach its stride within the last decade or so is the survival genre. Minecraft is probably the shining example that brought the survival moniker into the mainstream, but it's been in many other games before it, including in the MMORPG scene. Games like Worm Online, DayZ, Ark, and Conan Exiles are all examples of online survival multiplayer games that began popping up in online gaming throughout the years. Their common mechanics consisted of hardcore difficulty, realistic systems like hunger and fatigue, a vast open sandbox world to explore, player versus player engagement, and of course, the crafting. Oh boy, the crafting.
Hell yes.
The subject of today's video is a game that fits into the online multiplayer survival genre. Life is Feudal sets its world in the harsh environment of the medieval ages. Life is Feudal originally released all the way back in 2015, gaining quite a bit of notoriety. The iron was still hot on the Steam platform for up-and-coming survival games, so when Life is Feudal released, it gained the attention of quite a bit of players, at least for a time. They even somehow got Sean Bean to narrate their intro cutscene. If you can get a relatively big name fantasy actor like Sean Bean to do voice work in your game, then you must be doing something right.
What destiny awaits you? Will you find your way, or disappear trying?
One does not simply walk into Mordor.
But like many of Sean Bean's characters he's played, Life is Feudal had a tragic death. Unfortunately, over the years, the game has had quite a bit of struggles, getting shut down and then recently getting picked back up by a different company to revive it and bring it back online in 2023, with a recent relaunch on Steam at the time of this video. The new company, Longtail Games, has been slowly reworking different things in the background and in fact are today's sponsor for this video, as they provided me access to the game with a month's subscription of game time. Yeah, in case you weren't aware, Life is Feudal MMO is no longer a buy-to-play game. Instead, it's now a pay-to-play game requiring a $15 a month subscription. However, if you did own the game originally before this relaunch, you do get a month's free of game time. You can also potentially get additional game time by merging your old legacy Life is Feudal MMO account into the new website. Basically, any money you spent on the old game converts to LIF coins, which can then be used to purchase additional game time. Also, if you are a brand new player, you can jump into a 7-day free trial to hop in game and see if it's for you. Quick side note, we are covering Life is Feudal MMO, not the other versions of Life is Feudal, which are known as Your Own and Forest Village. Those are completely different versions of the game, still being managed by the original company, so essentially completely different games, which is a bit confusing, but try to keep up.
Okay.
So after hopping in game and checking out Life is Feudal MMO, can LTG turn this once promising game around? Let's find out. The story for Life is Feudal is shown in the initial intro cutscene for the game. It essentially sets up that you are a traveling survivor looking to make a name for themselves in the barren distant land you have adventured to. Character creation is pretty standard. You begin with your name, which consists of your first name, which can't be the same as another player's, and then your family name, which can be the same as others, similar to the naming you see in Final Fantasy XIV. Next, you have options for being either male or female, as well as choosing different character voices. The voice actors sound hilariously bad. So bad, in fact, it's actually almost good.
You are dead man! I see you!
You are a dead man. You are marked.
What a story, Mark.
Once you choose your voice, as well as some basic cosmetic choices in hairstyle, skin color, and facial features, you then choose your race. The races have slight differences in beginning customizable stats and skills, but ultimately, as far as I'm aware and have been told, it truly does not matter once you start training and progressing your character's build. Either way, once you make a race choice, you can then customize your starting attributes consisting of strength, agility, constitution, willpower, willpower, and intellect. Each attribute affects your crafting and combat skills in slightly different ways, as well as affecting other aspects of your character. Strength determines your efficiency with melee weapons, as well as determining the maximum weight of an item that you can wield properly. Agility determines efficiency with ranged weapons, as well as your movement speed. Constitution increases your maximum health pool, as well as determining the maximum weight of the armor you can equip. Willpower increases your stamina, along with your maximum inventory weight. Finally, intellect raises your maximum skill cap, which is something I'll have to explain later. Anyways, once you customize your starting attributes, you can then determine your starting crafting and combat skill levels. Once you are satisfied with everything, you are then plopped into the game's tutorial island. Logging into the game proper, you can see the game's graphics are pretty decent. Not great, but decent, and takes a more atmospheric approach to its music. Either way, welcome to Newbie Island. From here, you can talk to various NPCs, learn the game's various mechanics, and once you are ready, move on to the proper game. Most players will probably agree that while the tutorial does teach new players various things like how to interact with objects, harvest resources, craft items, and engage in combat, it's better to just skip it. Most people skip most tutorials anyways, but in an MMORPG, it's usually pretty important to learn how the game is played. The tutorial in Life is Feudal MMO, though, definitely needs some improvements. Things like mentioning what each stat does, or how important it is to grow specific stats to fill your role, or how to better approach combat situations would definitely benefit a game like this. Currently, as it stands, it teaches the bare basics, but most of what you will need to learn about the game will come from actual experience once you leave the tutorial. Either way, though, whether you trudge through the game's tutorial or opt to skip it, you will transfer from Newbie Island to the real world map, which is freaking huge. Just to give you an idea of how ridiculously huge this map is, this is me running around for about 10 minutes and barely covering any ground. It reminds me of older MMOs that had really open, sparse landscapes to explore, like Final Fantasy XI and EverQuest. I do have to admit though that it can take a bit to find something interesting while you are exploring the wilderness. Luckily, because of the Steam launch recently, there are more players running around to interact with, but even something as simple as random world events or quests would improve exploration. Getting back to the journey after Newbie Island, you'll probably feel incredibly lost in what you should do or even try to focus on. Well, first thing to learn when you begin is, depending on where you spawn, you begin in a non-PvP zone. The map can be toggled to show what areas are peaceful to avoid PvP in the beginning. From here, you can also teleport to other areas on the map to join friends, or if you want to join up with a guild, you can teleport to their area using a password. I recommend quickly joining up with the game's Discord server and learning about the game more in detail, because the game can be quite a challenge otherwise. Now, you are probably thinking that if you want a set task or goal, you should probably just talk to an NPC and grab a quest or something, right?
Wrong!
Well, Life is Feudal doesn't have any NPCs once you leave Newbie Island, or any quests to interact with. The game leans on its lonely atmosphere and has players create their own social experience, similar to how Fallout 76 had its lack of NPCs during its launch, and we all know how that went.
You f***ed it up.
Life is Feudal's main gameplay loops are going to be crafting/building, progression, player engagement, and finally combat. The crafting and building aspects of Life is Feudal is actually a lot deeper than I ever could have imagined. It takes a lot of inspiration and complexity from games like Worm Online. Building something on land will have you engaging with terraforming, where you as the player will have to manually dig or raise the ground around you. Pressing F3 will show the elevation levels near you, and to build things properly, you will need to have the elevations all relatively the same level. Doing so is a project on its own, sometimes taking literal hours just to get something as simple as a shack built. Doing all these activities like tilling the land, setting up a farm, planting trees, building houses, all rewards experience that goes into 3 separate experience pools, similar to a system like in Ultima Online. In Life is Feudal, to increase your skills, you will need the experience experience you are rewarded for these activities you engage in. Crafting experience is rewarded for doing simple things like mining, harvesting, smelting metal, cooking foods, or building a house. All the crafting skills are separated into different paths, where getting to rank 30 in a skill unlocks the next profession. There is a ton of different crafting skills, each with their own use in the world. Most players, though, will recommend you choose one path and stick to it. Combat skills are very similar with their pathing, but with the combat skills, each skill sort of represents a class with a specific weapon. Side note, combat in Life is Feudal is very slow and reactive. It has a similar structure to combat seen in other hardcore medieval games like Mortal Online and Mount & Blade, but it can be really jank here. The idea is that you have to take combat slow and plan your attacks. Specific directions your attacks go in can influence damage and body parts hit to help fell your opponents. When you begin, you will definitely feel weak, and that is sort of by design. Most attacks you perform will just straight up miss until you improve your overall skills and attributes. So unless you want to miss literally almost every shot you take, it's best to grind up whatever combat style you want to learn.
Nice shot, dumbass.
Each combat skill unlocks various weapons and armor you can wear in relation to that skill at each milestone. Most veteran players will also recommend you stick to one path in combats as well, versus trying to improve everything. The reason is because, once again, similar to Ultima Online, you actually have a skill level cap that restricts how many levels you can actually gain in your skills. This means that while you can level up a lot of different things, eventually you will reach a point where you just can't level up anything anymore. So rather than have a character that is mediocre at everything, it's best to stick to one thing and be a master at it. The community of Life is Feudal MMO is either going to be the game's saving grace for you, or what completely turns you away from the game. At its heart, Life is Feudal MMO is more or less a survival PvP MMO. That means when exploring out in the wilderness, if you ever happen to actually come across another player, you won't know if they are friend or foe. The whole map, except for specific peaceful zones, is open PvP, so if someone wants to attack you, they can. So it's highly recommended you join a guild to have protection and be part of a community. The game is meant to have this hardcore difficulty with it, so joining a band of other like-minded players will drastically change the way you engage with Life is Feudal MMO. Now, oddly enough, there is a queuing system for an organized PvP arena in the game, but I have no idea if it actually works, because I never saw anyone queue for it. Hence why, once again, I recommend you join a guild to find players to play with when you engage with the community of the game. It can go from an incredibly lonely, boring experience to one where you finally have tasks to complete and players who are more than willing to join you on your adventures, teaching you everything you need to know along the way. On the other hand, you may also experience the dark side of that PvP community, where griefers and toxic players reside. But currently, with the game's smaller niche community, pretty much anyone I ever ran into was incredibly helpful, and everything players have built and accomplished was with sheer dedication and just time invested. Life is Feudal MMO has no pay-to-win transactions to speak of. The only cosmetics the game has currently is through a monthly reward system, where each month you are subscribed, you get a couple of goodies added to your account. While it's nothing amazingly cool looking, I know a lot of people will appreciate that the game is free of pay-to-win and cash shop microtransactions. Just looking at the sheer scope of what players accomplished as a group made me look at the game in a different perspective and see that in some cases, there is potentially something here in this game. If the developers can iron out a lot of the messy mechanics, balance issues, and properly give this game the fixes it needs, then it can give those other survival medieval MMORPGs a run for their money. Let's get to my final thoughts. Life is Feudal MMO is going to appeal to those who want a really tough, hardcore experience where the game is going to take you quite a while to get on the ground running. Once you learn everything the game has to offer though, then things will start to click in place. I think it goes without saying, based on the game's aesthetics, if you want a dark, gritty, dirty, grungy medieval aesthetic in your game, then Life is Feudal will appeal to you. The game takes a more grounded approach to its world and has less fantasy in it, with basically zero magic. In terms of the game's crafting and building systems, it's definitely a lot more complex than I ever would have thought. Things like having to take into account ground level elevation, pylons to hold up weight, and actual physics never would have crossed my mind. In terms of the world map, it's probably one of the biggest wide open areas I've seen in quite a while. Technically, building off that alone means you can have an incredibly content-rich world to explore. It just needs players. Speaking of players in the community, the game, like older MMOs, encourages you to take on a specific role when you play. The way you build your character actually matters, which can encourage actual role-playing in the guilds you play with. Lastly, with this relaunch on Steam, the developers have been as active as ever, posting their roadmap they have for the game, as well as hopefully listening to the community feedback. Whether or not those things that desperately need to be fixed or changed actually happens though, well, I think Sean Bean said it best.
Only time will tell.
While playing the game, you'll probably notice that the physics engine is kinda buggy. To be fair, the developers are trying their best to fix problems within the game, and for the most part, issues you run into aren't anything game-breaking, they'll most likely just break your immersion instead. In relation to game improvements, the tutorial needs to be streamlined, make the area smaller, guide the players in better ways, and actually provide information on the game's systems that is helpful beyond how to interact with objects. A tutorial is just as important as the main game because it's what will help hook in newer players, and with the way it currently works, I can't help but feel it's turning away a lot more players than it's currently hooking in. I know the hardcore nature of the game will appeal to some, but if you are against losing everything when you die, fighting other players for resources, or having to manage things like hunger and stamina, then Life is Feudal MMO is not for you. It's a bit strange that the game is marketed as an MMO and has specific features that would be seen in other MMO titles, but if I really have to be honest, it's not really an MMORPG. There is no quests, no NPCs to talk to, no overarching main storyline to complete, nothing other than you and your band of knights taking on the world. Lastly, the game's monthly subscription is a pain point for many in the community. Take into comparison games like World of Warcraft, RuneScape, Final Fantasy XIV. From what I can see, the game is trying to mimic Mortal Online's subscription, but as that game's competitor, the company could one-up them and offer more in value. Those games either offer a cheaper subscription, a free-to-play trial, or are simply buy-to-play requiring nothing more than the purchase to play. My advice to help make the game competitive would be to either offer a free-to-play area or reinstate the early builds cash shop with cosmetic items to help build revenue for the game, rather than gating potential players from even trying it due to a monthly subscription. And those are my thoughts on Life is Feudal MMO. Like many of the games I've covered on my channel, it has potential, but until the company can clean up many of the drawbacks the game currently has, it's never going to break away from its current niche status. So now I ask you, the viewer, are you playing Life is Feudal MMO? Let me know down in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel, follow all my social media in the description, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.